a little bit. 6, don't allow the controlled energy to escape wildly and forge damage. As we said before, if a fire breaks out. And similarly we found, and this is no stab at Aharon HaKohen, but the fact of the matter is that when Moshe Rabbeinu called him on the carpet and says, why are these people serving this calf? That Aharon said, I told them, who has gold? And I threw it into this pot, and this calf jumped out. In other words, it broke out. It was something which was unforeseen. Okay, I mean, you could follow the Midrashim that say that this calf had a life of its own and it jumped out of the pot golden. The point of the matter is that Aharon's explanation and plea to Moshe was that he lost control of the situation. That's the principle here. Moshe asked him, how did this happen? And his answer was, things got out of control. Well, the Torah is putting that there, that even the best trained and the greatest of us cannot take a lackadaisical attitude. Or, in fact, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron Cohen, they were charged with supervision. They were the main managers of the entire people. They were the executives. And when the executives say to each other, it's gotten out of hand, then where are you at? And the Torah is saying is, whenever you're involved with a tremendous energy source, everybody, from the janitor to the chairman to the CEO of the facility, has to take responsibility so as not to let something get out of hand. All right? Locking up the gate escapes liability. If you take a look at the very beginning of Perek HaKones in Baba Kama, the 6th chapter, the first Mishnah, tells you when a person locks up his animals. When is he exempt from liability? If the breakout is unforeseen, then he's exempt. If he did not tie the animal up properly, he did not lock the door properly, he's negligent and liable. If Ganavim, robbers, come in and take the animal out, they become responsible. Here you see a number of principles. Okay. Again, ignore the fact that we're talking about barns and animals and in Ganavim. The principle is, if you control an energy source, you have to make sure that it is properly controlled. You might be exempt in the event that like a tsunami, where the breakout is something which is totally unforeseen. And if there is some type of human intervention, some type of human negligence, or human involvement that caused the energy to get out of control, those people who caused that uncontrolled situation assume responsibility. These are the principles that are very much in effect today, whether you're talking about a cow or whether you're talking about a nuclear energy facility. The project must remain supervised and controlled. E. Based upon the above, it would appear that those responsible for the maintenance of Fukushima would be exempt from the immediate effects of tsunami, but maybe not the long-term effects. However, there is the concept of, let's say, Yedei Shamayim. We do find in the Talmud, and I didn't write a citation here, but in a case of stealing, that if you steal from somebody and you don't know who you stole from, but it could be one of these 5 people, that Rabbi Akiva says that you need to pay back all 5 of the people, as opposed to just putting the money in front of the group and saying, here guys, whosever money that is, that it's yours back. That might legally fulfill the responsibility, but let's say Yedei Shamayim, in order to fulfill your responsibility in the eyes of God, which is a step above legal requirement, you have to consider paying for those damages that you are not directly and legally responsible for. In other words, as Jews, we have to consider the possibility that just because you've paid off does not necessarily mean that you have fulfilled your responsibility, and that after 120 years, you might be called to the carpet on this. I remember that I heard this Dvar Torah from my Rebbe, Rabbi Zelig Star, Oliver Shalom, and I'll try to say it very quickly. When he spoke about the ayin tachat ayin, the pasuk of eye for an eye. Now we know that Talmudically, only payment is made. If you knock out somebody's eyes, you don't get your eye knocked out, even though that's what the simple explanation of Torah seems to say, that if you knock out somebody's eyes, your eye gets knocked out. Yet the Talmud fills in and says, well, it's actually monetary payment. So Rabbi Starr said on this, he says, the written Torah, the actual eye for an eye, is the philosophy. The Talmud is the practical application. Even though you've paid for the person's eyes, in other words, we have to do some type of monetary compensation in order to close the case, to finish the case. But, said Rabbi Starr, when you walk away after you pay, you can never forget that you actually took away that person's eyesight. And this is something that you need to carry in your heart forever, for the rest of your life. Yes, you paid him off and the case is over and you don't have to talk to the guy ever for the rest of your life. But don't forget, you took away his eyesight. That's what the Torah, the written Torah, saying is ayin tachat ayin, saying is, you took away, don't forget, you took away the guy's eyesight. And you can't pay money for something like that. And it's also possible to say, and Rabbi Starr didn't say this, but it's also possible to say that ayin tachat ayin is actually legal. Is that what the Torah is trying to say is, you have to pay for whatever procedure might return that person's eyesight to them. Meaning that maybe back in the days of the Talmud, just evaluating the person as if he was a slave, that might be sufficient. But today, if there was some type of medical procedure due to modern technology that would actually restore that person's eyesight, what the Torah Shebichtav is saying, what the written Torah is saying is you have to pay for that. You have to restore that person's eyesight. Ayin tachat ayin. You took out his eye, get another eye in there. In other words, restore his sight. And if restoring the sight could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, the written Torah is saying is that's what you need to do. And that might even be legal. And that might even be enforceable according to the Torah and the Beit Din. All right, onwards. 7. Now, what if you have followed the building code and an accident happens? Okay, you followed the code. You did everything what the municipality told you to. And then there's a catastrophe. You followed code. Maybe you shouldn't have to pay. Maybe you escape by hiding in the compliance with building code. Can you say, why should I have to pay? I followed the building codes. Okay. Now, obviously, there's a difference between something like a tsunami, which is completely out of the realm of normal. Okay. That you would be exempt from because no one in his right mind, I mean, even places where they have tsunamis, they don't normally have tsunamis. Tsunami is completely normal. No one is expected to guard against a tsunami. If a tsunami happens, no one could expect liability. The issue is, the type of accident that the building code was attempting to thwart does happen. It happens on a normal and usual basis if you don't take safeguards. Now the question is, if the building code was followed, does the facility escape liability? Now Baba Kama, Samach Aleph Amud Bet, 61b, talks about if a person places an oven on the second floor of an apartment, there needs to be a base, which is 3 handbreadths thick, so that the heat from the oven doesn't go down and destroy the floor, which is the roof of the bottom floor. It needs to be able to absorb the heat. Now, what happens if the person does follow the law and he makes that 3 handbreadth base? Yet, the damage still happens. And the guy didn't fire up the oven any more than anybody would do it. Just, I don't know, it happened. He followed building code. Is he liable? That actually is an argument between what is known as the Tanakama, the first Kana, and Rabbi Shimon. So according to the Tanakama, if a damage still happens, the owner must pay. The idea is that the goal of setback statutes is to minimize the chance of damage, not to rule them out. If damage occurs, one is still liable to pay. It doesn't become unforeseen just because you follow the setback rules. But Reb Shimon says, oh yes, it does. According to Rabbi Shimon, compliance with the setback rules is to escape liability. That's the whole purpose of those rules. The Tanakhama says that's not the purpose of the rules. The purpose of the rule is to minimize the possibility of the hazard. And Reb Shimon says, well, of course. And when you minimize the possibility of the hazard's not going to happen. So if the hazard happens, it's unforeseen, and unforeseen, you're exempt. And Tanakhama says, no, it doesn't make it unforeseen. It just minimizes it. But still, it's understood that if it happens, it's not like a tsunami. If it happens, you got to pay. Number 9, we are not to deplete or destroy resources. Now, this could also apply to the environment around you. There's the mitzvah of Shiluach Hakan, which is found in Devarim, Kaf Bet Zayin, 22:7. Shalech t'shalach de'em v'et benim tikach la. Send away the mother and eat the eggs and chicks, according to Rav Yitzchak Abarbanel, or some people say Abravanel. The idea of this law is to prohibit the destruction of a resource. The mother is sent away to re-nest elsewhere. According to Abarbanel, it's got nothing to do with mercy or feeling for the mother, for the mother bird. It's akin to not cutting down a tree. You send the mother away so that it can re-nest in another place and produce new eggs. So you're allowed to eat the fruit, meaning the eggs. But don't cut down the tree, meaning kill the mother. You also find in Leviticus, Vayikra, Kaf Bet Kaf Chet, 22:28. Otov et beno lo tishchatu b'yom echad. Don't kill the mother and the child in the same day. According to Barbanel, it's the same reason. Don't deplete the resource. Also in time of battle, it says in Devarim, Kaf Yud Tet, 2019, that we're when you're in war, don't cut down fruit trees. Ramban says, Nachmani says, because of the prohibition against depleting your sources of energy, your sources of food. Now it's interesting, Rashi has a different take. Rashi says, trees are uninvolved in the war. You know, Ki ha'adam eitz hasadel avo mipanach b'matzor. Is a tree like a human being? Of course not. Don't involve them. In fact, Rashi has an interesting concept, is that you have to, Rashi is telling us is that we as people have to respect the ecology, not in terms of its benefit to human being, but just on its own merits of being a creation of God, and the environment deserves its respect independent of any human need. That's an interesting concept. The tree is not involved in the war. The tree requires its own respect. Respect the tree. But if that were the case, then why cut down barren trees? And why only fruit trees? You must answer that barren trees need to be respected unless you really need to cut them down. But fruit trees should be spared at almost all costs. In other words, Rashi's idea is that, yeah, even trees that don't bear fruit, unless you absolutely need the material of the tree, trees are part of the environment, and the environment needs to be respected. Don't cut down barren trees as well. Fruit trees, for sure not, because they provide food. Barren trees, they provide shade, they provide lumber. If you absolutely need them in the army effort, in the war effort, then cut them down. The communities have a right to protest construction of a facility. If you take a look in Baba Batra, Kaf Amud Bet, 20b, sometimes the community has the right to protest, sometimes not. It depends on the level of pollution. In their case, noise pollution. The entire chapter 2 of Baba Batra, which we'll take a look at in the next lecture, discusses numerous variables that must be considered before building a potentially harmful facility in the vicinity of populations. However, this right of the community to protest is balanced against the economic need and customary pollution as opposed to extreme pollution. In other words, for example, if it's a type of industry that that is involved some type of air pollution, and it's a type of industry which provides a significant source of income for the families who work there, it minimizes the community's right to be able to protest its existence. I remember many years ago driving by these big things that held soybeans, and it really smelled. When you drove by, it really smelled. It's something that the people living around there have to deal with, because that particular industry provided a great deal of income for their workers and for families. And also, smell, and at least in that situation, was not caustic to the point that it did damage. It just smelled bad. So another issue is the question of the toxicity. How toxic or how caustic is the pollution involved? Is it causing people to actually get sick, or is it just an annoyance that you just have to put up with? Well, those are important issues. In Baba Kama, Tzaddik Beis, 92, Amud Aleph, grapes making more valuable dates taste like wine. There were some date trees that were growing near vines. And the Amora, the rabbi, said, rip out the vines, because the dates are more valuable than the grapes, and the grapes are making the dates taste bad. Other rabbinical responses related to pollution, the right to protest. All of these are principles that could be applied in the event that a energy facility is somehow polluting the environment in which it exists. Number 3, accepted versus experimental industry. Would a nuclear energy plant qualify as an accepted industry, or should it be viewed as an experimental industry? Well, I guess by now it's considered an accepted industry. But there was a time where it was considered experimental. And it would be a different set of rules. And this is something that you need to consider. That maybe in the advent of the harnessing of nuclear energy, when something new is discovered, then you're talking about an experimental industry, an industry which is not providing a lot of income, an industry in which the safety hazards are unknown, an industry in which there is a high fear of hazard. There the community has a right to protest. But if the industry, if the facility has already been tried in many different locations safely and providing a lot of industry and economy to the surrounding neighborhoods, then there is less of a right to a community to protest to the government to stop the facility from being built in their backyard. Because the government could say, it's safe. We've proven it's safe in all these other places. And besides, it provides a tremendous amount of jobs. These are issues of halacha, not just issues of American society. We're talking about issues of a Torah society. And the last thing I want to talk about right now is the concept of maiming or mutilating God's blueprint for creation. In Leviticus, Vayikra Yud Tet 19:19, it talks about the concept of kilayim, crossbreeding. And the general principle is crossbreeding that leads to destruction of species and changing God's blueprint of creation is what is prohibited. And that's said by Nachmanides, Ramban. When is the change permitted or prohibited is beyond the scope of this lecture. But that's not something that we're really going to talk about, other than you ought to just know that there is some line which needs to be debated when energy is harnessed to make change in in biology, for medicine, forensics, war, if the energy is used to disrupt, to destroy, to mutilate, to maim God's creation, then you're already talking about a prohibition of many things, possibly including kilayim, if you are causing things to grow a hand out of your head or something like that. It's a little facetious. But if it's under the principles of la'ovda ulashomra, usage of an energy source, but safeguarding it and keeping it safe, that is the overriding, guiding principle of the Torah. And by maintaining that, we continue as Jews to be servants of God in the progress of society. All right, first lecture done.